If you're enjoying these stories, you can support us on Patreon. There are several unique stories over there that I haven't uploaded to YouTube. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you can. Now, let's get into the story. The Case of Vanderbilt and the Yeggman. In glancing over the somewhat disjointed and voluminous notes of the cases which I have had the privilege to share with my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I find many which present features of a highly remarkable and outre character. Some, such as the grotesque affair of the Sussex vampire, I have already placed upon record, though the complexities of that dark business were overshadowed by the sheer impossibility of the conundrum that preceded it. Upon the margins of my journals from that particular year, nestled between the shocking resolution of the Matilda Briggs and the singular affair of the aluminum crutch, is a simple, bold heading. It was a case that tested the very boundaries of physical science and forced Holmes to employ a strain of deductive reasoning so abstract that even I, accustomed as I was to his extraordinary methods, found myself entirely bewildered until the final, dramatic revelation. The affair commenced on a Tuesday in late November. London was held in the suffocating grip of a dense, mustard-coloured fog that rolled up from the Thames, blanketing the streets in a thick, miasmic shroud. The gas lamps, lit even at midday, appeared as blurry, sickly yellow orbs in the gloom. Within the sitting-room of 221B Baker Street, however, a bright fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows upon the flock-papered walls. Holmes had spent the entirety of the morning in a state of high nervous energy. He was engaged in an experiment of a most peculiar nature. He had cleared his chemical apparatus from the sturdy deal table and replaced it with a large, square plate of brass, suspended horizontally by a central clamp. Upon the surface of this plate he had sprinkled a fine layer of white sand. In his right hand he held the bow of his beloved Stradivarius, heavily rosined and taut. "Watch closely, Watson," he instructed, his grey eyes gleaming with that intense ascetic fire which always accompanied his scientific inquiries. He drew the bow sharply across the edge of the brass plate. A high, shrieking note filled the room, vibrating painfully against my eardrums. Simultaneously, the sand upon the plate leapt and danced as if possessed, rapidly arranging itself into a perfectly symmetrical, star-like geometric pattern. "Fascinating, is it not?" Holmes remarked, tossing the bow upon the table and reaching for the Persian slipper wherein he kept his dark shag tobacco. Ernst Chladni, a German physicist, discovered this phenomenon in the late 18th century. The bow induces a resonant frequency within the brass. The plate vibrates in specific modes, and the sand gathers in the nodal lines, the areas of the plate which remain perfectly still. "It is a pretty parlour trick, Holmes," I replied, setting aside my morning copy of but I confess I do not see its practical application to the grim reality of London's criminal underworld. "Do you not, my dear doctor?" He lit his clay pipe with a glowing cinder from the fire. "Sound is a physical force, Watson. It is a wave of pressure that travels through the air, capable of exerting mechanical energy upon the objects it encounters. If one knows the precise resonant frequency of an object, be it a brass plate, a wine glass, or, heaven forbid, a suspension bridge, one can induce vibrations of catastrophic magnitude. The universe is governed by mathematics and frequency. Why should the criminal element be blind to the laws of physics? Before I could formulate a reply to this cryptic observation, the heavy tread of Mrs. Hudson was heard upon the stairs, followed by a sharp, authoritative rap at the door. "Enter," called Holmes. The door swung open to reveal our old friend, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. His ferret-like features were drawn into a mask of supreme vexation, and his bowler hat was damp with the London mist. Behind him stood a man of an entirely different stamp. He was tall, heavily built, and possessed the ruddy, aggressive complexion of a man accustomed to command. He was attired in a tailored suit of American cut, an astrakhan overcoat, and a diamond stick-pin that glittered ostentatiously in the firelight. "Good morning, Lestrade," said Holmes, gesturing lazily toward the basket chair. "And good morning to you, Mr. Harrison Vanderbilt. I perceive that the complexities of high finance in New York have not entirely dulled your appreciation for the bleakness of an English winter." The large man stopped dead in his tracks, staring at Holmes in astonishment. "How the devil do you know my name, sir? I have been in London but 3 days, and I have made every effort to keep my arrival strictly incognito." Holmes smiled, a thin, self-satisfied curvature of the lips. "There is no magic in it, I assure you. The initials HV are heavily embossed in gold upon the leather portfolio you carry under your arm. Your accent, which you have not yet employed, but which was evident in the heavy, measured cadence of your step, a distinctly American stride, quite unlike the hurried shuffle of the Londoner, speaks of the New World. As for your identity, the Vanderbilt family's recent acquisition of the London and North Western Railway shares has been the subject of much discreet chatter in the financial columns. One need only observe the exceptional quality of your attire and the proprietary manner in which you entered my rooms to deduce that you are a man of immense wealth and significant familial standing. Harrison is the most prominent Vanderbilt currently operating upon this side of the Atlantic." Vanderbilt let out a bark of laughter. "Well, I'll be damned. They told me you were a sharp one, Mr. Holmes, but I didn't expect a parlour reading. Lestrade here said you were the only man who could make sense of the absolute humbug that has occurred at my residence." "Lestrade flatters me," Holmes replied, settling back into his armchair and bringing his fingertips together in his customary attitude of reflection. "Pray, sit down, gentlemen. What is this humbug of which you speak?" Lestrade took the chair, pulling a small black notebook from his breast pocket. "It's a burglary, Mr. Holmes, but not a standard lay. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was black magic. Mr. Vanderbilt's private vault in his Mayfair residence has been cracked. £200,000 in bearer bonds, along with the famed Empress sapphire, have vanished into the fog." I gasped. £200,000! That is a king's ransom. "It is a trifling sum to the Vanderbilt estate," the American interjected, waving a dismissive hand, though his eyes burned with fierce indignation. "But I will not abide a thief, sir. It is the principle of the matter. Furthermore, the bonds were bearer bonds, entirely negotiable. Whoever holds them possesses the wealth." "The amount is of secondary interest to me," Holmes said, his eyes half closed. "It is the method which piques my curiosity. I take it from Lestrade's profound state of bafflement that the vault was not a simple strong-box." "Simple?" Vanderbilt snorted, lowering his bulk into the sofa. "That vault, Mr. Holmes, is a bespoke fortress. It was designed by Whitworth of Manchester, utilising a composite alloy of manganese and hardened steel. The door weighs 3 tons, but the lock is the true marvel. It is a dual-mechanism Brahma-Yale hybrid, custom-built by the finest horologists in Switzerland. It possesses 14 independent tumblers, requiring a key of such intricate design that its duplication is physically impossible without the original master cast, which resides in a bank vault in New York. There are no exposed hinges, no seams wide enough to accept a knife blade, much less a stick of dynamite. It is, by all laws of engineering, impenetrable. And yet it has been penetrated, Holmes murmured. Exactly, cried Lestrade, leaning forward. That's the rub of it, Holmes. We found the vault wide open this morning. And here is the impossible part. There is not a single scratch upon the lock. No signs of forcing, no drill holes, no acid burns, no evidence of explosive powder. The lock mechanism is in perfect working order. It is as if the thief simply possessed the key and walked right in. A duplicate key, then? I suggested. Impossible, Vanderbilt barked. I am the only man in England who possesses the key. It has not left my pocket day or night. He drew forth a heavy silver chain attached to his waistcoat, at the end of which dangled a bizarrely shaped brass instrument bristling with wards and jagged teeth. Holmes took the key, examined it briefly through his pocket lens, and returned it. A formidable piece of hardware. When was the theft discovered? This morning at 8 o'clock, Vanderbilt replied. I went down to the basement to retrieve some documents. I found the heavy steel door standing ajar. The interior strongbox had been emptied. Who resides in the house? Only myself, my valet, and 3 temporary staff hired from a reputable London agency. I have already had Lestrade interrogate them. They know nothing. And the exterior of the house? Any signs of forced entry? A broken pane of glass in the scullery window, Lestrade supplied. The latch was undone from the inside, but any common cracksman can break a window, Holmes. It's the vault that defies reason. I've had 2 of my best locksmiths look at it. They swear on their mothers' graves that the lock was neither picked nor forced. They say it must have been opened with the key. But the key never left Mr. Vanderbilt's person, Holmes mused. A delightful paradox. The impossible has occurred, and therefore we must look to the improbable. The broken scullery window was undoubtedly a blind, a theatrical touch to suggest a common break-in and distract from the highly specialized nature of the crime. Holmes sprang to his feet, his lethargy vanishing in an instant. The hound had caught the scent. Come, Watson, slip on your Inverness. The fog is thick, but the game is afoot. Mr. Vanderbilt, if you will be so good as to lead the way to Mayfair, I should very much like to examine this impregnable fortress of yours. A 4-wheeler was waiting in the street below. We climbed in, and the cab rattled off through the yellow gloom, navigating the slick cobblestones toward the affluent squares of Mayfair. During the journey, Holmes sat in silence, his chin resting upon his chest, his eyes fixed upon the opposite seat. Lestrade attempted to engage him in theories regarding international jewel thieves, but Holmes offered only monosyllabic replies, lost entirely in the labyrinth of his own mind. Vanderbilt's residence on Grosvenor Square was a magnificent Georgian townhouse, exuding wealth and privilege. We were admitted by a pale, trembling butler and immediately descended to the subterranean level of the house. The basement had been extensively renovated. A long, narrow corridor lined with brick led to a reinforced steel door. "The outer door," Vanderbilt explained. It was unlocked. We stepped into the vault room. It was a remarkably large chamber, entirely windowless, illuminated by electric lamps which cast a harsh clinical light. The walls were constructed of heavy granite blocks. In the centre of the far wall stood the vault itself, a monstrous gleaming cube of brushed steel, its massive circular door hanging open on thick, concealed pivots. Holmes bounded forward with the agility of a panther. He fell to his knees before the open safe, producing his magnifying glass and a tape measure from his deep pockets. For the next 20 minutes he was entirely absorbed in his work, ignoring us completely. He examined the intricate tumblers of the heavy door, sniffing at the brass, running his sensitive fingertips over the metal. He crawled upon the floor, sweeping his lens across the flagstones. He measured the dimensions of the room, tapping the walls with the silver head of his walking stick. "Most singular," he muttered to himself. "A perfect parabola. Yes, yes, the curvature of the ceiling. The acoustic properties must be extraordinary." He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees. His face was flushed with the triumph of discovery. "Well, Holmes," Lestrade asked impatiently, "have you found the ghost's footprints?" "Ghosts do not leave traces of refined pine rosin, Lestrade," Holmes said, holding up his fingertip, upon which rested a microscopic speck of white powder. "Rosin? What does that signify?" "It signifies much. Tell me, Mr. Vanderbilt, did you arrange the furniture in this room?" Vanderbilt looked bewildered. "Furniture? There is no furniture here, save for the vault." "Precisely," Holmes said, his eyes sweeping the bare, echoic chamber. "There are no carpets, no tapestries, no chairs to dampen the sound. It is an echo chamber. And look here." He pointed to a faint, semicircular scratch upon the flagstone floor, roughly 3 feet from the face of the vault. A tripod of some sort was placed here, heavy metal-tipped legs, and here, upon the face of the lock itself. He beckoned me forward. I peered through his lens at the heavy brass dial of the lock. I could see nothing. "Look closely, Watson, at the very edge of the dial, near the seam." I strained my eyes. There is a tiny smudge. It looks like a speck of wax, or perhaps tree sap. "Excellent, Watson. It is beeswax, the sort used to adhere objects temporarily to a surface." Holmes turned to the American. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I can assure you that your lock was not picked, nor was it forced. It was coaxed. It was sung to." Lestrade let out a loud guffaw. "Sung to? Really, Holmes, this is too much. Are you suggesting a burglar stood before the safe and serenaded it until the door swung open?" "I am suggesting, Inspector, that the burglar utilized the science of acoustics," Holmes replied, his voice deadly serious. "I warned Watson of this very principle only this morning. Every physical object has a resonant frequency. The 14 tumblers within this lock are suspended on heavy steel springs. If one were to calculate the precise mass and tension of those springs, and then generate a continuous powerful sound wave at the exact matching frequency, the tumblers would begin to vibrate. They would oscillate with increasing violence until they overcame the resistance of the springs and literally vibrated themselves into the unlocked position." Silence descended upon the room. Vanderbilt stared at Holmes as if he were a madman. "You are telling me," the millionaire said slowly, that someone opened my 3-ton bespoke manganese steel vault with a noise?" "With a very specific noise," Holmes corrected. "A low, sustained, immensely powerful vibration." The thief brought an apparatus, likely supported by the tripod whose marks we observed, and affixed a conducting nodule to the face of the lock using beeswax. This apparatus generated the frequency, transmitting it directly into the mechanism. The lack of acoustic dampening in this room, combined with its parabolic ceiling, amplified the effect, turning the entire chamber into a resonance engine. "But what kind of machine could do such a thing?" I asked, astounded by the sheer audacity of the concept. "That, Watson, is the crux of our investigation," Holmes said, his eyes glittering. "The trace of rosin I found on the floor provides the answer. Rosin is used exclusively by stringed musicians to create friction between the bow and the strings. The thief did not use a mechanical engine. He used a musical instrument. An instrument of monstrous proportions and bizarre construction, capable of producing acoustic pressure far beyond that of a standard cello or bass. The man we seek is known in the American criminal vernacular as a Yeggman, a highly skilled safecracker. But this man is no ordinary Yegg. He is an acoustic genius, a criminal virtuoso." "This is fantastical," Lestrade muttered, shaking his head. "Even if I believe this fairy tale, how do we catch a man who steals with music? Run around London arresting every fiddler we see?" "No, Lestrade," Holmes said, snapping his pocket lens shut. "We track the instrument, a device capable of creating such immense acoustic pressure, built to withstand the tremendous tension of heavy steel strings necessary for low-frequency resonance, cannot be bought in a standard music shop. It must be custom-built by a master luthier, and there are very few men in London with the skill and the eccentric genius required to construct such a monstrosity." Holmes abruptly turned on his heel. "Mr. Vanderbilt, do not touch the vault. Lestrade, keep your men out of this room. Watson, we are returning to Baker Street. We have a great deal of research to conduct in the annals of London's stringed instrument manufacturers." The ride back to Baker Street was a stark contrast to our outward journey. Holmes was animated, his mind racing through the possibilities. Upon our return, he immediately plunged into his extensive indices, dragging down heavy volumes of trade directories, specialized musical journals, and his own meticulously kept scrapbooks of London's artisans. "The requirements for such an instrument are highly specific, Watson," he lectured as he threw books onto the floor in a growing pile. "It must possess a resonance chamber of significant volume, heavily reinforced to prevent it from tearing itself apart under the strain of the necessary acoustic vibrations. The wood must be dense, perhaps African blackwood or Macassar ebony. The bridge must be of reinforced steel. An ordinary violin-maker would turn the commission away as the ravings of a lunatic." He ran his finger down a column of a grimy trade directory. "No, no. Hill & Sons are far too traditional. Baer is strictly classical. Ah, here is a possibility. Giuseppe Moretti, an Italian immigrant operating out of a small shop in Soho. Renowned for his experimental designs in the 1880s, attempting to create a subcontrabass capable of shaking the foundations of a concert hall. He was laughed out of the Philharmonic Society, a man with a bruised ego and a talent for the grotesque. He is our starting point." The fog had deepened into a thick, choking pea-souper as we ventured out once more, this time into the narrow, winding alleys of Soho. The air smelled of stale beer and roasting chestnuts. We found Moretti's shop tucked away between a noisome fishmonger and a dilapidated public house. The windows were opaque with grime, and a faded wooden sign in the shape of a lute hung above the door. A bell tinkled weakly as we entered. The shop was a chaotic jumble of wood shavings, pots of boiling hide glue, and half-finished instruments hanging from the ceiling like dismembered wooden carcasses. From the back room emerged a small, wizened man with a shock of white hair and a leather apron coated in varnish. "Signor Moretti?" Holmes asked, stepping forward. The old man squinted at us through thick spectacles. "Si, I am Moretti. The shop is closed. I take no new commissions." "We are not here to commission an instrument," Holmes said, his voice taking on a smooth, persuasive quality. "We are here to admire a masterpiece you recently completed. A piece of highly unorthodox design. A heavy resonance chamber of dark wood, reinforced with steel, capable of sustaining massive string tension, accompanied by a heavy custom-made bow and a tripod stand." Moretti's face went pale beneath the varnish. He took a step back, his eyes darting toward the door. "I know nothing of what you speak. You are mistaken." "I am rarely mistaken, Signor Moretti," Holmes said, his voice hardening slightly. "The instrument was used last night in the commission of a major felony. £200,000 have been stolen. If you conceal the identity of the purchaser, you become an accessory before the fact. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard is currently waiting at his desk, eager for a name to attach to a warrant." The threat of Scotland Yard broke the old man's resolve. He slumped against a workbench, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. "Madre de Dio," he whispered. "I knew it was evil. The man, he paid me in gold, 3 times my usual rate. He said it was for a radical acoustic experiment, a study of sub-harmonic frequencies. He provided the schematics himself. Brilliant schematics, mathematically perfect, but the instrument, it was a monstrosity, an abomination of the craft." "Describe it to me," Holmes demanded. "It was shaped somewhat like a viola da gamba, but asymmetrical," Moretti explained, his hands gesturing to illustrate the dimensions. "The belly was carved from a single block of heavy ebony, 2 inches thick. The sound post was forged of solid brass. Instead of a standard scroll, the neck terminated in a heavy iron-geared tuning mechanism like that of a winch. The strings were not gut, nor even standard wire. They were high-tensile steel cables drawn by a bridge engineer. He required an acoustic funnel, a brass cone attached to the F-holes to direct the sound forward in a concentrated beam. The acoustic nodule," Holmes nodded to me. "And the man who commissioned this beast? What did he look like?" "He was an American," Moretti said. "Tall, thin as a rail. He moved with a strange, precise grace, like a dancer. His face was sharp, pale, with a prominent scar running through his left eyebrow. But it was his hands that I noticed most. They were the hands of a concert pianist. Long, incredibly dexterous fingers, heavily calloused at the tips from playing wire strings." "Did he give a name?" "He called himself Mr. Silas." "And where did you deliver the instrument?" "I did not deliver it. He came here to collect it 3 days ago, in a hired cab." Moretti paused, thinking hard. "But I did notice something. When he paid me, a slip of paper fell from his wallet. He picked it up quickly, but I saw the letterhead. It was from the Golden Anchor public house in Wapping. Holmes tossed a sovereign onto the workbench. "You have been most helpful, Signor Moretti. I suggest you stick to carving traditional violins in the future. The subharmonics of the criminal world are best left unexplored." As we emerged back into the foggy street, Holmes was rubbing his hands together in sheer delight. "The pieces of the puzzle fall into place with the precision of a well-oiled machine, Watson. An American Yeggman hiding in plain sight in the Docklands, utilizing his acoustic genius to crack the impenetrable Vanderbilt vault. A man with a scarred brow and pianist's hands. He cannot be hard to find." "But surely he has fled the country by now," I argued. "He has £200,000 in bearer bonds." "Ah, but bearer bonds of such high denomination are not easily fenced, Watson. They are conspicuous. If he attempts to cash them immediately, Vanderbilt's bankers will flag the transaction. He must secure a buyer in the criminal underworld, a fence capable of handling such a massive sum at a fraction of its value. That takes time. He will remain at his lodgings in Wapping until the deal is struck. We must strike first." Our journey from Soho to Wapping was a slow, agonizing crawl through the thickening fog. The docks were a labyrinth of shadowy warehouses, creaking ships, and narrow, mud-slicked alleys. The air here was heavy with the smell of brine, tar, and rotting timber. We located the Golden Anchor with little difficulty. It was a rough, disreputable tavern, frequented by sailors, stevedores, and the less savoury elements of the East End. Holmes did not enter immediately. Instead, he drew me into the shadows of a doorway opposite the tavern. "We must proceed with caution, Watson. A man who possesses the intellect to design such a crime is not a common footpad. He will be paranoid, alert, and likely armed." Holmes slipped away into the fog, leaving me to keep watch. He returned 10 minutes later, a look of grim satisfaction upon his face. "I have spoken to a street urchin who frequents the rear of the tavern. A tall American, matching our description, has rented the garret room above the pub for the past week. He rarely leaves, but he receives occasional visitors of a furtive nature. The fences are circling." "Shall we send for Lestrade?" I asked, reaching for the heavy Webley revolver in my coat pocket. "There is no time," Holmes replied sharply. "If a fence arrives and the bonds are exchanged, they will disappear into the black market forever. We must take him now." We crossed the street, avoiding the main entrance of the tavern, and slipped into a narrow alleyway that led to the rear of the building. A rickety wooden staircase clung to the brickwork, ascending to the garret window. "Softly, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Tread lightly. If he hears us, the game is up." We climbed the stairs, the old wood croaking faintly beneath our weight. We reached a small landing before a heavy, weather-beaten door. A thin sliver of light escaped from beneath the sill. Holmes pressed his ear to the wood, closing his eyes in concentration. "He is inside," he breathed. "I can hear the rustle of paper. He is counting the bonds." Holmes stepped back, gesturing for me to draw my revolver. He then raised his foot and delivered a tremendous shattering kick to the door just beside the lock. The rotten wood splintered instantly, and the door flew inward with a crash. We burst into the room. It was a cramped, stifling garret, lit by a single oil lamp on a rickety table. Seated at the table, surrounded by towering stacks of crisp engraved railway bonds, was a tall, skeletal man. A jagged white scar cut violently through his left eyebrow. Upon the floor beside him rested the most extraordinary object I had ever beheld. It was the instrument Moretti had described, but the reality of it was far more grotesque. It was a dark, hulking contraption of thick wood and gleaming brass, looking less like a musical instrument and more like a medieval instrument of torture. A heavy steel tripod was bolted to its base, and a large brass megaphone-like funnel protruded from its belly. The American reacted with the speed of a striking cobra. His hands flashed toward a Colt revolver resting upon the table, but my Webley was already levelled at his chest. "I wouldn't advise it, Mr. Silas," Holmes said coldly, stepping fully into the room. "Or should I call you by your true moniker? Whispering Jack Kelly, if my memory of the Pinkerton files serves me correctly. A former prodigy of the Boston Conservatory, expelled for gambling debts, who subsequently turned his genius for acoustics toward the cracking of bank vaults." The American froze, his long, calloused fingers hovering inches from the Colt. His eyes darted between my revolver and Holmes's impassive face. Slowly he raised his hands in surrender. "You have the advantage, gentlemen," he drawled, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that contrasted sharply with his rough surroundings. "I must confess, I did not expect the legendary Mr. Sherlock Holmes to breach my sanctuary so swiftly." "Your methodology was brilliant, Kelly," Holmes said, his eyes drawn inevitably to the monstrous instrument on the floor. "A perfect application of resonant frequencies. You calculated the exact tension of the tumblers in the Whitworth vault, likely by studying a similar model in America, and constructed this device to vibrate them into submission." Kelly smiled, a tight, humourless expression. "It took me 3 years to perfect the mathematics, Mr. Holmes. The Vanderbilt lock was a masterpiece of engineering. But man-made structures are rigid. They resist force, but they succumb to sympathy. I simply played the lock its own internal song, amplified 1,000-fold. The tumblers danced to my tune." "A fascinating application of physics to grand larceny," Holmes agreed. "But you made a fatal error. You left a microscopic dusting of violin rosin upon the floor of the vault, and a trace of beeswax upon the dial. It was a small thread, but pulling upon it unravelled your entire tapestry." Kelly sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The rosin! A sloppy oversight. I was rushed. The vault door began to swing open faster than I anticipated, and I dropped my bow." He looked at Holmes with a strange mixture of defiance and respect. "You have won, Mr. Holmes. The bonds are all there. Not a single pound is missing." "Watson, fetch a constable from the street," Holmes ordered, his eyes never leaving the prisoner. "The game is concluded." Within the hour, Inspector Lestrade had arrived with a contingent of uniformed officers. The bonds were secured in a locked leather valise, and Whispering Jack Kelly was led away in handcuffs, his composure never breaking. Lestrade arranged for the monstrous acoustic device to be transported to Scotland Yard as evidence. "A brilliant piece of work, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade beamed, clapping my friend upon the shoulder as we stood in the damp Wapping street. "You've recovered the Vanderbilt fortune and captured a master criminal in less than 12 hours. The Yard owes you a debt." "The Yard owes me nothing, Lestrade," Holmes replied coolly, lighting a cigarette in the foggy night air. "I do this for the intellectual stimulation, not the accolades of the police force. Ensure that the instrument is handled with extreme care. It is a deadly weapon in the hands of a physicist. The following afternoon, we were once again seated in the comfort of 221B Baker Street. The fog had lifted, replaced by a crisp, clear winter sun that streamed through the windows. Mr. Harrison Vanderbilt sat upon our sofa, the heavy leather portfolio containing his bonds resting securely upon his lap. He looked decidedly chastened. "I must offer you my profoundest apologies, Mr. Holmes," Vanderbilt said, his earlier arrogance entirely evaporated. "I doubted your methods. I believed my vault to be invincible. You have proven me a fool on both counts." "Do not be too harsh upon yourself, Mr. Vanderbilt," Holmes replied, examining his fingernails. "Your vault was indeed impervious to mechanical force. You simply failed to account for the physical power of sound. It is a variable that few engineers consider." "I have already cabled Whitworth in Manchester," Vanderbilt said. "They are redesigning the lock mechanisms with dampening chambers filled with lead and rubber to absorb resonant frequencies. Such an attack will never happen again." "A wise precaution," Holmes noted. "And the Empress sapphire? It was recovered with the bonds, I trust?" "It was," Vanderbilt smiled, tapping his breast pocket. "I am deeply indebted to you, Mr. Holmes. I have brought a cheque, drawn upon the Bank of England, for whatever sum you deem appropriate for your services." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "My professional fee is fixed upon a standard scale, Mr. Vanderbilt, unless I choose to waive it altogether. In this instance, my standard fee will suffice. However, I must ask for one additional favour." "Name it," the American insisted. "When Kelly's trial concludes, and the evidence is no longer required by Scotland Yard, I wish to take possession of that monstrous violin. It is a singular artifact of criminal ingenuity, and it would make a most fascinating addition to my small museum of curiosities." Vanderbilt laughed heartily. "It is yours, Mr. Holmes. I never wish to see the infernal machine again." After the American had departed, leaving behind a generous cheque and a haze of expensive cigar smoke, Holmes picked up his Stradivarius and tucked it beneath his chin. "A singular case, Watson," he mused, drawing the bow gently across the strings, producing a sweet, melancholic melody that stood in stark contrast to the destructive power we had witnessed the previous night. "It is a reminder that the human intellect is a double-edged sword. In the hands of a Moretti, the physics of sound create music that elevates the soul. In the hands of a Kelly, they create a key that unlocks the darkest vaults of human greed." "It seems to me," I observed, settling into my armchair with a profound sense of relief, "that it is fortunate for society that you, Holmes, have chosen to apply your own formidable intellect to the side of the angels." Holmes smiled faintly, closing his eyes as he lost himself in the music. "Perhaps, Watson, perhaps, but I confess the mathematics of that resonant chamber were breathtakingly elegant. It is almost a pity that such genius must rot in a cell at Dartmoor." And with that provocative sentiment, the great detective allowed the melody to swell, filling our Baker Street rooms with a harmony that, for the moment at least, pushed back the shadows of the criminal world. Thank you for watching. Before you go, don't forget to check out our Patreon.